Hello, and welcome to today's training. My name is Zach Guthrie, and I work on the data team in the Office of Homeless Services. This training will be going over all that is required for basic end-user training and is an introduction into expectations and processes in the HMIS system. So this training will be in two parts. One will be overall policies and protections, whereas part two will go over practical application, where we will spend some time in the training database. So let's go ahead and get started. What is HMIS? Well, it stands for Homeless Management Information System. And it's basically a database that stores everything that has to do with homeless services in the state of Utah. Specifically, UHMIS is what we are called. And basically, it collects all that is about a client, whether that be their name, social security number, birth date, race and ethnicity, things like that. Now, that is called Personal Protected Information, or PPI. That is the kind of stuff that we want to keep away from everyone else. We don't want that information to get out. However, the system does create a randomly generated number called a client ID. That's what we can use to describe clients in certain communications. So for example, if you're emailing us, you can say, hey, I would like to talk about client 12345. I want to talk about their services. I want to talk about their assessments, their enrollments, things like that. That is what HMIS is for, and that's how we can use it in today's system. So who uses HMIS data? Well, obviously clients don't just get to have access to HMIS. This is a good way to track what those clients' information is, as I said earlier with PPI, but it's also a good way to track, what kind of progress they're making. We want to track kind of things like how they can get connected to programs, what they're eligible for. We also want to keep track of things like what information they need to gather in order to get into those programs. For case managers and staff, it's a little bit different. We can help keep track of, their case notes. They can keep track of their case plans. They can keep track of what client updates that they need to give, notifications. Whereas providers can use that as a whole. And we're kind of growing. I want you to keep in mind, we're kind of starting in a concentric circle and working our way out. So we started in clients, case managers and staffs. Now we're moving to providers. Providers can use this information to give a report based off of inventory of their beds in their shelters. They can give information on how many people have come through a project, case plans, community triage, all that. Now we're moving to the final circle out, which is local communities. This basically informs the entire story. How does this get used across the city, across the state, across the LHC or local homeless communities, and giving that data-driven access a much wider communication. Now, how is this information used? So obviously we talked about things that can be done. Well, how is that information used? Mainly it's used as a reporting purpose. We can kind of project where clients are going to be. We can project where, requirements should change, where things need to be updated, how things can be updated when it comes to case plans, case notes. But it's going to sound a lot repetitive when it comes to just simply reporting. But that reporting can garner a lot of communication. So for example, if you know that your reporting purposes send out a bed number list every single morning, and you say, okay, I know that we are sitting at 89% capacity. I know how I can work to, maybe I know a client who is close to getting all their vital documents. That'll help the provider, will help the case manager, help the client. With local communities, they can use this to help supply information towards, reporting towards the state legislature, report this to the annual report on homelessness, where it gathers things like mentioned here, point in time count, housing inventory count, and system performance measures. But all that information is then sent to the federal government, where it gives a overall process on how Utah is doing when it comes to homelessness. But something we always need to curtail this back to is client-centered data. We're not here without our clients. Our clients need us, and we need to focus more on that. But that comes in two parts. One, we believe that helping clients work towards getting out of homelessness is the best possible solution. We also understand that this is a traumatic experience for clients, and so we need to look at this from the lens of trauma-informed care. We also need to adhere to some motivational interviewing, a lot of partnership communication. So we have the link here for trauma-informed care and also motivational interviewing. We also have a lot of tips and tricks in our UHMIS newsletter archive. That is a plethora of information. So if you would like to go through that, it's on our website, and you can go through and just kind of take a look at anything that we've done in the past. So privacy is a big aspect of what we do our job in, and this comes from our standard operating procedures, which is actually at the bottom, UHMIS privacy policy, or you can find it on our website at utahhmis.org/governance. This information, as I said before, is protecting PPI, name, date of birth, social security number. Think of that information that you would not want others to know about you unnecessarily. This information is what we have to safeguard. We have to keep protected, because without that, there's a lot of trust that goes out the window, and we want to maintain that for our clients we're serving. So speaking of that, every single end user has to sign an end user agreement. This is a contract between you and HMIS. You basically are going to be signing that you understand what you cannot do in the system, what your responsibilities are, how you might lose access, how this all portrays towards what specifically goes on within our policies, within your agency's policies. If your agency's policies are not up to date with that, obviously you are more than welcome to review that and bring it up, so that we can take care of that. But we want to understand that this is a rules and regulations document. We want you to understand that clients deserve to have those protections put into place. And so this formal agreement is stating that. So obviously we give you access to this through HMIS privacy policy as well. And if you need an end user agreement, just understand that you're filling it out. It's in 2 pages. So you first have your printed name, organization, job title, and email. If you are working at an HRC, so the Homeless Resource Center, or other shelter the homeless facility in Salt Lake County, we'd want you to check that. This is a 2-page document, so you're also going to be initialing certain sections on the second page. Be aware that we have to have you sign it either through something like an Adobe sign document program, or you have to sign it actually by hand. We can't have you type this in just because that's not considered viable. So just be aware of that. So we want to focus in on a couple of key points. The first one is user policy. All of this comes from our standard operating procedure, which is approved by our UHMIS steering committee. And so they're the ones that take this, look through this. It's a very, very long document. And they say, okay, what gives us the ability to govern over this? So if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to look through that policy on our website. But also understand, this isn't just about, we want to be super formal. We want to be protecting this and protecting that. We also understand, on one side, it's all about the clients, and also understanding it's about how to be professional with others. You are entering a database that has a lot of information, but we also need you to understand that treating others, respectfully, fairly, and in good faith within your agency, within other agencies across the state, we're all in here to work on one goal. That is to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. So just keep that in the back of your mind as you're going, as you're about to enter into this database. Next, privacy. It's all about consent. Without consent, we're not authorized to share this information with other agencies. As I said, you're going to be asking the client to share their personal protected information. We get this consent by having a client sign an informed consent release form. We do have access to that, and your agency should as well, in either English or in Spanish. So those who can give consent, those who are the age of 18 and above, and those who are not also in a temporary or permanent impairment state can also sign, but those who are below the age of 18 or in that impairment stage cannot sign. So just bear that in mind. Next, how often do we get this? Well, it's always good practice to get it at the first time that a client has ever met with that agency or at the beginning of a new enrollment. Next is if the client has not signed a new end user agreement within 7+ years. And then also if they're adding a dependent, so anyone who's below the age of 18, just because there are certain rules that come into place that we'll talk about here in a little bit that comes into the consent form. So now if a client says, hey, I don't want my information shared, I don't want to sign this agreement, that's totally fine. That's totally their right. That information still will be collected by the agency, and that information won't be shared with other organizations. It will be shared with, that current organization, and also with other entities, things like our team, the Office of Homeless Services data team, the lead agency developer. So in this case is Ecovia. They have to kind of keep the wheels greased in some kind of way. And so making sure that everything is working. Also with funders, certain situations occur where, a funder might say, hey, I need to see how many people have moved out into housing, or I want to see how many people are staying in shelter, things like that. And then the final one is certain situations where, the UHMI steering committee might approve research opportunities for those who are asking for research documentation. They go through a high level scrutiny when it comes to those requests. And the HMI steering committee is comprised of those who are either working in service provider world or who have lots of experience in that realm. They do not let certain small things go by. They want to make sure that they are keeping that to the highest level scrutiny as possible. So next one that we're going to talk about is privacy, the consent release form. So in this kind of sense, it's, the client's personal version of the who, what, when, where, and why that we've already talked about. We want to make sure that the client has read this in its entirety. We want to make sure that everything is legible, signable. We want to make sure that this has the highest potential for understanding from the client's perspective. We do also have a Spanish version of this as well. So please reach out to our website or look at our website in case you have a need for that. So we do have a lot of people ask us why we require this. It gives clients that ability to ask questions. We gives them that ability to see what are the requirements. It shows what they can and cannot do in the system. We want them to have that transparency available. Going through this kind of nitty gritty, the first part is there's going to be an agency line where, as you can see on the right-hand side, there are 3 small boxes for agencies. It's very tiny. We apologize. We do have a fillable PDF version of this, so that way you don't have to physically write in your agency's name, especially if it's really long. But we want to make sure that we are collecting that name on top of the documentation as we can. Next, at the very bottom, we have dependent children under the age of 18. So this is keeping track of if you have a head of household, their legal dependents can't sign, as I stated before, but we want to make sure that we're keeping track of that. So this is a line for that. Next is client signature, client name, and date. For the name that's printed and date, please make sure that it's legible. We would need to see what that client's name is. Same goes for agency staff name and date. Make sure it's legible. We need to see who's signing. So the 3 checkboxes are client provided verbal consent, client refused, and client restricts some sharing. So with these, each of these represent different things. So client provided verbal consent, that's just going off of if a client is, calling over the phone or something like that, or as stated down below, if they're an emergency shelter or street outreach project and they are going through some sort of crisis or impairment, they can get access to services, but they have to be designated with verbal consent. So it's over the phone and in those emergency shelter and street outreach. Next, if a client refuses to participate, we can check that. Obviously, what we've already talked about is making sure that they understand what that looks like. And then lastly is client restricts some sharing. So if a client comes and says, I don't want to work with this particular agency, but I would like to work with yours, that's where this would come into play. Client revoking their consent does happen. It is rare, but it does happen. And so when you have a client come in and say that they want to restrict their access, understandable, sit them down and say, okay, everything that has been shared already cannot be restricted any further. It's kind of like a picture on Facebook. It's out there forever. But within that, any information moving forward will be restricted. No one else can see it. Totally fine. Now, if the client decides to restrict their information, that means it's restricting that client's information, as I stated. But it means that they also could possibly become ineligible for certain projects. For example, coordinated entry. That is a project that requires a consent form to be signed. So that way that information is shared, just because coordinated entry, the way it works is that a lot of places have access to that, to who's on the by name list. But in this current, without going into too much detail into coordinated entry, that just gives you a good understanding of what could happen. So if they do restrict their access, it doesn't mean that they can't receive services to a lot of projects. It just means that they're going to be probably not have access to certain projects. And if it does happen, if a client does say, hey, we want to restrict our access, please reach out to our email, or you can look on our website. So that way we can answer any questions that you might have. Next is privacy posting. This is basically a formal, on the wall posting that needs to be hung anywhere that is clear and wherever data is collected. So if you're an agency that might have, offices or a lobby or a front desk or whatever, where client information will be collected and entered into HMIS, this needs to be front and center. We have it in English and in Spanish, but it needs to be present so that way anyone can see it. As I said, this is kind of like the why we do things, what we're going to do, what your rights are, but it's all there so that way clients can see it. To wrap up privacy, clients' rights, simply put, they still have access to services, even if they choose not to share it. We want to make sure that clients are receiving services, especially if it's a certain situation where they're like, hey, I don't have a lot of trust, but I need help. That's what we're there to do. We're there to help. If a client is, having temporary impairment or they're having a mental crisis, take care of that first. We would much, much, much rather have you take care of the client first than worry about this stuff. We can handle the documentation and the paperwork later. Next is they can change their allowance on how that data is shared. They can also change how their information is shared in HMIS. They can also change who has access to that information. Obviously, certain agencies. They can also take a look at their information. If anything, that's preferable. Please make sure that they can take a look at their information so that way they can make sure it's correct. I would hate to be in the system and find out my name is spelled incorrectly. They can also view, their legal dependents information and also their own. Now, I want to put a big emphasis here. They can only see their information and their legal dependents. This means that, if they come in and say, hey, I need to see my, step aunt's cousin's goldfish twice removed on their uncle's side information, that does not count. It is only their own personal information and their legal dependents information. So everyone else is out. If a client comes in and says, hey, I need to file a grievance against HMIS, we have a grievance form that's linked here. That's totally fine. Understandable. If that does come up, we want to make sure that they have the ability to file a grievance form, but make sure that it's for HMIS, not for your agency. We have received agency grievance forms in the past, and we don't know what to do with them. We kind of just send them back because it's not about us. So if a client comes in and wants to fill out a grievance form, make sure it's about HMIS so that way we can tackle it. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and talk security. So I'm not going to go into the, super nerdy side of things, except for that's okay. This is just going to give you a brief rundown of what to pay attention to, things like, accessing HMIS, sharing information, stuff like that. So with this, within our HMIS policy, just be aware, we do have to change passwords annually. We do have to require that. If you are not logging into HMIS within 90 days, it will kick you from the system. So, set yourself a calendar invite once a month if you're not using it that much. And so that way it doesn't have to go through this whole process. Also, please make sure when you are first going into HMIS, into the live database, you'll see a little pop-up in the right side of the window that will say, set your security question. It won't go away until you do that. So please make sure you set your security question. Also, all systems terminals, that's basically laptops, computers, whatever is accessing HMIS, need to have locking screensavers and antivirus software. So make sure that that is updated. If you'd like to know any sort of fancy cybersecurity practices, we do have a link here from the Department of Defense 2023 Cyber Awareness Challenge. If you'd like to get into that kind of stuff. So there are some, howdy doodly do's and howdy doodly don'ts. On the do side, make sure that your password is really challenging. Make sure it's not easily crackable. We don't want something to go into the password that will be easy for someone to hack into. Also, when you're not using HMIS, or when you log out of HMIS, make sure that you're not using HMIS as a whole. There's only so many spots that we have available, so log out. Don't stay in there. Also, make sure that you have screen protectors to ensure that no one can see your client's information. Just as simply as shutting the lid or Control-Alt-Delete, locking your computer screen. If you can, get one of those screen protectors. I myself tend to close the door, close the windows, just because I don't want to have a certain situation occur where someone might be writing down a client's information behind me. On the don't side of things, make sure that you're not sending client PPI in emails. As I stated before in the first part of this, client PPI is anything like social security numbers, names, dates, or birth dates, things like that. That's why the system creates a randomly generated number called a client ID. Use that when you're sending an email. Instead of saying, dear HMIS team, I would like to discuss John Smith. Their birth date is 1/1/1970, and their last four digits of the social security number is 1234. Instead of that, which would warrant a very fun email from me, please make sure that you are, only using the client's ID. So instead of that, say, dear HMIS, I would like to talk about client 12345. Perfect. I can work with that. Makes it super easy. Also, for final, just kind of don't share your password with anyone. If you're one of those people that has to write it down, make sure that sticky note is out of sight. So that way, you don't accidentally give that away. Now, if there is a security breach, what is a security breach? Well, that is basically when anyone tries to use malicious software, viruses, brute force attacks, all that fancy technical jargon. Basically, they're trying to get into the system or trying to get into the files that you are trying to keep hidden. If that happens, follow your agency's policies on security breaches. Also, reach out to us. We do have our HMIS email, or on our website, we have our contact list. Contact anyone on that list so that way we can get that taken care of. We really, 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 really don't want to have a security breach. So now we're going to go into data quality. Now this kind of wraps up, we talked about privacy, we talked about security, that talks about what we're protecting, that talks about, how to protect it. This is the why. This is why we're protecting it. This comes into, the 5-spoke wheel kind of approach over data quality. We have accuracy, completeness, consistency, timeliness, and training. So with accuracy, it's how right is it? We want to make sure it's close to, 100% real as possible. If, someone is going through a certain situation and they find out their information is wrong, well, we want to correct it. That's part of the validation process. A part of the validation process, also a part of the agency, we recommend doing this quarterly. Just because you want to go through, you want to make sure your information is correct. Pull a report. If you need help doing that, please let us know. But pulling a clients and programs report, pulling a data quality report, there's a lot of reports out there that we can help you validate your data for. Next is completeness. Well, we want to make sure that that information is full. So there are certain questions that, if a client says, hey, I just don't know what my social security number is. It's totally fine. That's data not collected, or data or client doesn't know. That's totally fine. We just want to make sure that we are also trying to have that conversation with the client so that way we're having the fullest pieces of information possible for that client. Next is consistency. We want to make sure that we, as we're approaching, certain standards, we do have the HMIS data standards that come out, and we want to make sure that we are tuning to that. In this training, we're going to go over race and ethnicity. That has been, put together as a part of the new data standard updates. That's totally why we need to have this consistency, because if we have agencies that are not understanding that across the state, we want to make sure that those things align. Next is timeliness. This is basically talking about how fast are you, the worker, getting that information into HMIS. So say, hey, I had a client, I did an assessment with them on 9/1/2023. So a few days behind, and we do not want that to happen. And so now I have to go back and put that assessment in, and technically it's considered late. It's still in, but it's still considered late. Policy-wise is we would like to get that information within 24 hours, at most within that 5 business days. It makes our life a little bit easier as a whole. Next is training. Stuff like this. This is basic end user training. So this is, bare bones, essentially. Bare bones explanation of what you need to know. But we're building, and we are coming out with, and we already have a plethora of other training options. So if you feel like you need another training, or if you feel like, hey, this just wasn't just quite enough, I want to expand upon it, let us know. I'm in charge of training, and I would love to expand that. Next is also things like newsletters or recertification. So we do send out newsletters periodically to those who are in the live database. We also have recertification. Every single person, including myself, who creates the quiz has to do this recertification every single year. We tend to do it at the beginning of the year. If this is not done, unfortunately, we have to kick you from the system. But this is just part of that, keeping you up to date on all the information. So something to be aware is, repeat after me, only you can prevent bad data. That's important. Bad data creates a lot of chaos in the system. It creates a lot of untrust. It creates a lot of instability when it comes to people asking us questions. We are only as dependable on the information that we have in the system. And so by having this information at a higher level creates this client-centered, data-driven experience. We don't want to have a situation where we go, hey, because of how much I screwed up, means that someone does not receive services is a huge impact. So pay attention to that. That's why we have linked here the 2024 HMIS Data Standards Manual, in case you're wondering, hey, why do we require this particular data metric and not this one? Go through that and actually figure it out. It makes a lot of sense once you go through it. So just to be aware that those certain things are implemented, but only you can prevent it. It starts with you. Next is we're going to go over the homework. Before I go into the actual training database itself, this is, as I said, basic end user training. What we require you to do is to go in, create at least 2 individual clients and 1 family of 2, so totaling 4 imaginary people. Please make the names great. We absolutely get a kick here at the Office of Home Services when we see these creative clients created. It makes our day. But try to stick to specifically the project that your agency is for. And then also make sure that you're adding a service for the head of household, at least 1 to 3 services. Please do not accidentally push the button that selects all services. It's only 1 to 3. Don't make it harder for yourself. Also, you will have to create a during program enrollment for that assessment for each of the clients. Make sure it's for each client. So when you do the family of 2, of at least 2, something to be aware of is some people accidentally skip over the child, and all of a sudden I'm going, where's the second one? So just be aware of that. Finally, you'll have to exit the enrollment. So that way, at least we can see it. And then also at the very end, you'll also need to make sure that you're submitting a HMIS end user agreement, as we've already talked about. Make sure that that's taken care of.
All right, so we're going to be going over the basic navigation portion of this. We're going to start with basic navigation and work our way through what is required for the basic end user training homework. This is going to be answering certain questions that you might have when it comes to what is the bare necessity of what is required when it comes to the homework and what is to be expected when you're using the system. So once you get set up in the training database, you're going to get sent a URL that leads you to the training database. The way you know that you are in the training database is it says Utah HMIS training. My username is my work email, and then the password is something that I set. We will send you a password, a temporary password that you will be able to change. I've already done that for me, so you will not see what happens after this. However, what you'll see is a request to change your password as you go through. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in, and it's going to take me to this welcome page. So you're going to see a couple of things that might change a little bit. You're going to see a pop-up in the top right that says please review your recovery information. You're going to see welcome to this specific site. You're going to see client track by Ecovia, all these different kind of things. Obviously on my screen it's going to look a little bit different just because I've been in the system for a while. So let's go ahead and direct you to a couple of things. First off, that pop-up that says please review your recovery information, that is directly designed for you to set up a security question in case you ever forget your password. That can be arranged right in here on security settings, and I already have a security setting here, but you can update your account recovery information and you can alter your question there. So just be aware that that's where that would be. Next, as we are moving on to this toolbar, you're going to see, if I click on my initials here at the top, ZG, you're going to see access to workgroup, organization, theme, and a couple of other things. So this setting menu will appear where you can, personalize your settings a little bit. As I said, your theme, your profile. Security settings, that's where you change your passwords, set your security question. And then at the very bottom, or at the very top, you'll see sign out. Now the sign out, we only have so many spots for client track. Basically, we can have only so many users in the system. So when you're not using the system, go ahead and log out. You're going to see work group. Most of you are going to see UHMIS, HMIS programs. If you are needing a different work group, that is a completely different training, so be aware of that. Organization, I work for the state of Utah, HMIS, so that's my organization. Yours might be, yours is going to be under the organization that you are requesting this training for. Theme, you can change it up. You can do high contrast, dark, what have you. I keep it as a default just because I'm boring. And a couple other things that you won't have to worry about, clear preferences or workgroup designer. So we're not going to worry about that. All right, so next we're going to be talking about how to request help. So if there's an issue that you see, or if there is like, hey, I need to remove something in the live, when you're in the live database, I need to remove something, I need to have something removed, that's where we help step in. So you're going to click on this little icon. Let me do that again. You're going to go to this bottom left icon. You're going to see a question mark with a circle, and it says help. You're going to click on that. and it's going to bring up a couple of this window, and you're going to see a few things. So you can watch a video, system administration guide, keyboard shortcuts, report an issue, ask a question, make a suggestion, those kind of things. For this one, we're going to be talking about report an issue. So if you were to click on that, it's going to bring up report an issue, and it's going to have a whole bunch of little things on here. So as we talk about reporting an issue, first enter a summary of your issue. This could be client 12345 needs to have a service removed for this specific date. Let's start with that. Next, you say this is the specific service, whether it's like case management for 9/25/2023 needs to be removed from client 12345. Now, the difference from this comparatively to, say, emailing the HMIS team is you can actually reference client information here. So if it's client Jane Smith needs to have this service removed, that is completely okay. This is where you can discuss that information, because then we can have that conversation back and forth. Next, you're going to have email address and phone number for your contact information. Don't worry about all this other stuff, but mainly it's fill out roughly what it is and then go into specifics here. The more specific it is, the better chance we have of not coming back to you and asking for clarification. So just be aware of that. All right. Next, we're gonna go through the buttons on the left-hand side here. So these are your work groups here on the side, and I'm going to expand. I'm weird. I like having this all condensed down just because it gives me more space here in the main page. But we're going to go and open this up, and you have these different workspaces. Think of these as different books, and then you have different chapters, and then if you click on these are different pages. So book 1 is home. So this is where we are right now. Next, we have client's workspace. This is where you're going to be able to actually interact with the client's profile. Next is coordinated entry, providers, and then favorites. Favorites is where you can favorite certain assessments or certain things that you end up using quite a bit. So that way it's all designated right here. Okay, so we're going to go to the home page, and we're going to look at My Client Track. So if you see here, My Client Track, this is where you can also interact with your information. So this is going to be based off of things like, change my password, if you'd like pulling reports quite often, your information, those kind of things. That's where that information will be. As we stated about submitting an issue, this is also where you can click on My Submitted Issues. So if you need to be tracking or keeping up to date on what you've requested, that's where that will be. Next, we're going to talk about this search bar at the top. This search bar can do a lot of different things, and I think a lot of people, unfortunately, don't get to use it to its fullest potential. This can be things like, recent searches, recent clients, providers, reports. So if I wanted to look up data quality report, for those who use that report, if you could spell it correctly, wow. Pulls it up right here. I don't think I still spelled it right. That's fine. Next, if you want to look up a specific client, so you only need to answer the first 3 letters of the first and last name, and it'll bring up those clients. And this brings up their information, so social security number, name, birth date, any information, client ID, all of that. So please use this search bar so that way you can navigate things a little bit easier for yourself. All right, next we're going to be talking about user dashboard. So this is, as I said before, is kind of my own one. This is just because this is, clients I've created, programs I've interacted with, things like that. This home button, actually, I should mention this. This home button, this actually has a name. This icon's name is Skippy, and this is the Ecovia logo. So if you're ever curious, yeah, that thing actually has a name. The name's Skippy. And so if you ever want to blame, how things are running, just blame it on Skippy. Everything's fine with that. But yeah, user dashboard, this is where you're going to see, news that pops up. If we enter it here, you're going to see, your case assignments, all of that's going to be here. Next, we're going to go down to things like tools, case plan tools, reports, all of this stuff right in here. So tools, this is stuff like, if you've paused any sort of program, or if you've paused any sort of assessment. Mine obviously looks a little bit different because I've been in the system for a while. You also have active case assignments. So if you are a case manager and you would like to look up your clients that you are actively assigned to, this is where you can find that. So again, it's homepage, tools, active case assignments, open enrollments with most recent assessments, bar list setup, all of that's going to be in here. Moving down from tools, you have case plan tools. So this is going to be all of your emergency shelter street outreach projects, even more projects on top of that. This is all your case plans. So again, if you're a case manager, pay attention. This is where you're going to be able to find all of this information, your case plans, your case plan status, your reports. This is going to be your best friend. For you upper administrative folk, so you're going to have reports. This is the whole thing. And to give you kind of an idea, this is just HMIS reports. We have going everything from clients and programs, HUD data quality report, APRs, point in time count, LSA, Hopwood. This is all going to be in this section. It takes up a lot of space, so be prepared to spend some time. We are going to be coming out with the reports training, but this is where you're going to be able to play around with that. Next is coordinated entry, or actually finally is going to be coordinated entry. So with coordinated entry, this is going to be where you're going to be doing your incoming and outgoing referrals, your by name list tracking, if you're going to be referring from clients based on services or providers or something like that, this is where that's going to live. So something you're probably going to ask is being like, what's global admin and at global administration? As part of our team, we have access to a folder called global admin. So I'm just going to address it real quick. You don't have access to that, so don't be surprised if you don't see it. All right, so we went over the home workspace. Now we're going to go over the client's workspace. Kind of think of this as the client's profile. So you have all these different kind of buttons on the side. You have this main page. What is this? Well, this is basically what has the client been working on, and if they have a profile. So we're going to talk about find client first. If at any point you are wondering if a client is already in the system, this is where you can go. You can search by first name, last name, social security number, birth date, even their ID, their client ID. So for example, if we look up, let's do Harry Potter. And as I said, you can do the first 3 letters of each. Well, there's 47 results currently in the training database. So that's going to be a little excessive. If you want to look up everyone's favorite social security number, this one's even better. There are over 984 clients in the training database with just ones as their social security number. Again, this is the training database. It doesn't matter. In the live database, it very much matters. So if you're needing to make sure that you don't have any duplicates in the system, this is where you're going to want to start. So let's go ahead and back that out. Now, finally, scan client ID. You can also just kind of just look it up. I have no idea if this is actually going to be a client ID. No, I was guessing. But you can search by client ID here as well, or birth date. You don't have to fill out all this information at once. If you just have a piece of information, that's where you can check. So go ahead and cancel that page out. Next is client dashboard. That's kind of what we're on. So we're just going to work through our way through these buttons. So client dashboard just brings you up to this page. So if you ever need to go back to this specific client that I've been working on, this is where you can see everything. So to give you kind of a rundown, as we talked about in the first part of this training, you have a randomly generated number called a client ID. That's where this lives. So this one is 426145. This is, again, randomly assigned. You can use this to discuss with anyone. This is not classified as personally protected information. But to go through this part is all protected information. So this is the name, gender, birth date, race, age, veteran status. That is all PPI, so just be aware of that. Further down, you have their enrollments. So you have client information, enrollments. These enrollments can range from any kind of project type, but it will also go into things like if they're exited or not. So if the client is actively in that particular project. For the purpose of what we are working on, these are all exited. But you can sift by this as well. So if you want to minimize the project type, and if you're only looking for, say, transitional housing, you can actually look up that client's transitional housing project type. If you're just sifting by, exited or not, you can minimize this even further. Further down, we have services. So these are what is attached to what the client has been working on in those enrollments. For example, this one was mail pickup for 9/19/2023. That is where that goes. Now, I do want to draw your attention to this top identifiers. So you have enrollment description, active household members, household type, all this stuff. Well, what is it and what's it for? Well, so first you have enrollment description. So what is the project? In this case, MSO is the is the assigned letters or numbers of an agency. So if you are familiar with Shelter the Homeless, STH is theirs. And then after that comes the project. So Miller Mixed HRC. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. Shelter the Homeless Miller Mixed HRC. So if I'm reading this, this tells me, okay, I have a client who is staying at one of the HRCs. Next, active household members. This number will be based off of how many members are in the family. Second, if you see this number after you have exited a client and there is still a number, first of all, that means someone was missed. Second of all, that means that there is an active assessment or an active enrollment somewhere down the line that was not exited from. Next, household type. So there's households without children, households with adults and children, and then households with no children. That's households of only children. Those are kind of the three criteria you're going to see there. Next is project start date and exit date. So that's when they started in this particular HRC and when they weren't in the HRC anymore. Number of days enrolled. Obviously, this is a bad example because we were doing some testing, so it was very quick. And next was exit destination. Where did they go after leaving this facility? So this one was place not meant for human habitation. If this was going to be a housing project, so let's say we were doing PSH, housing move-in date is 9/18/2023. This is some randomly number that I gave it to, but if you have a client who's getting their keys, that day is what would be the housing move-in date. And then last assessed, when was the last time they were assessed? So this is really important for those of you who are going to be doing annual assessments, when those are required after every year. So the next time this client, if they were staying in the HRC and had not been exited, the next time that they would need to be assessed would be 9/20/2024. But this would just give you an idea of what to pay attention to. Alrighty, so that gives you an idea of the main page. And it gives you a pretty clear rundown of everything that you're going to need to do. But now we need to talk about locating a client record. So as I said, you can click on Define Client here, and this will, again, give you everything you need to search for. You also do this through the intake process that we'll talk about here shortly. But again, make sure that you're checking. Look for the first name, look for the last name, try it separately. Make sure that you're understanding that you don't want to just randomly assume that that's going to change. After that, with this information, we're actually going to move into creating a client. So you do have this button up here called Intake, New Enrollment, or Client, and it's going to affect all of these things down below. So client information, services, case management, case plans, all that's going to be affected based off of if a client is created. For the basic end user training homework, and this is where I'm going to make this really obvious because I think everyone needs to pay attention right here. For the basic end user training homework, you need to create a new client as well as all the other requirements. So you don't get to just search for a random client and then go off of there. When we are looking at your homework after you submit it to us, we are going to be checking for those kind of things. But let's go ahead and get started with creating a client, and then we'll go through all these side things as needed or as we get to them. But I just want to get the ball rolling with that. So it's going to bring up this page. This is an intake. If you're wondering what 2322 means, that's just the form number. And it's going to ask you a whole bunch of pieces of information. So for the homework, you're going to want to do add a new client. If you want to search using, or if you want to use that current client that you're on, you'll be able to search here. And if you want to select another client, you can select that as well. But for the homework, add a new client. And as we did the find client before, this is the same process here. They want you to search for the name. So if you were to create Harry Potter, they'd be like, hey, just a heads up, there's 42 results found. And it'll bring up this warning that you can click on. Oh no, it's just gonna be right here. Yeah, it's just telling you, please review the list for potential duplicates. But there's a lot of them. And you can search by first name, last name, social security number, all that. In this case, we're not gonna do that. We're gonna just create a let's do, because that shouldn't be anyone. Yep. So test client P is not someone who's in the system. Now you're going to be going into entering their basic client information. For the sake of this example, we're going to be doing a family household of 2, one who is above the age of 18 and the other is a child who is below the age of 18. The reason for that is 1, it'll give you the broadest example of what is expected in the homework, and 2, as a recommendation for the homework, if you choose a child under the age of 18, the assessment process is much quicker. I'll show you what I mean. For this case, we're going to be filling out this information. Everything you see in red is going to be required. This kind of information is just, we won't let you go through unless that's covered. So let's do ahead and enter it into a social security number. We'll do, you know, something really random. And if you saw, that button moved away, the social security number. If you fill in a full social security number, it'll just automatically populate it as completely full. Whereas I believe if I remove it completely, you can bring up social security number quality. You're going to see a couple of options from here on out. So approximate or partial social security number. If a client doesn't know all of their social security number, that's totally fine. If the client doesn't know at all, client prefers not to answer, or data not collected. Those are the options. If you just automatically fill it out completely, it's not gonna hurt your update. It's not gonna ask you to fill it out completely. Next is birth date. So let's go with that, because you know everyone likes to feel older. So date of birth quality, this one is where it'll ask you. So full date of birth reported. Next is race and ethnicity. So we're going to go ahead and just choose one of these. We're going to go with Asian or Asian American, man, boy, if child. The difference between race and ethnicity and gender is race and ethnicity has updated with combining, if you're familiar with ethnicity and race being separated. So these are all that apply. So if someone identifies as Asian or Asian American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, that's totally fine. If there's any additional details, you can fill this out as well. So for gender, you can choose between certain things like man, boy as child, transgender, things like that. Something I want to define real quick is gender is someone's identity that they identify with, not necessarily what they identify at birth. So just keep that in mind. Veteran status, we'll go ahead and say no. If you had said yes, nothing changes yet. But for right now, we're going to go ahead and do no. Also, something that I need to point out, because we usually talk about this right here, if your agency requires additional information besides those things that are with red asterisks, that needs to be backed up in policy. So anything with red asterisk is required by HUD. Anything outside of that is superfluous, and so we need to have your agency back that up as to why you're collecting that information. Sometimes it's really important. For example, contact information. If you're an agency that does primarily street outreach, it's probably going to be beneficial for you to know how to get in touch with that person later on, if that client is willing to provide that information. But for the most of you, anything with the red asterisk, that's required. Anything outside of that, unless otherwise specified in policy, you're not going to have to worry about. At the bottom here, you're going to see family information, and I want to define this also a little bit, because some people just kind of think that it's, you know, mother, father, children kind of thing, kind of structure. It's anyone who identifies as a unit. So if they're planning on going into housing together, that would be considered a family. So you might have, you know, siblings, you might have that, you know, mother, father, children structure, you might have friends. It's what they identify as that family unit. So where they're planning on going into housing together. So if you're going to go ahead and finish on this, and that's the basic client information. Next is family members. So this is where we're going to add the child. Now, it's different than basic client information up here. For family members, you're going to basically do everything else that you just did, only it's going to be on a horizontal line rather than a, you know, vertical space. So if we're going to do first name is just client P, and it's going to search the database for that name. Hit cancel. Name, full name reported. Birth date, we're going to do 1/1/2021. Full date of birth reported. Next is gender, so you're going to hit these three dots and hit gender, and you're going to hit woman, girl, or child. Social security number, I'm going to do some real random, I don't know, I just type buttons. Next, relationship to head of household. So since the original designation to that first person was self, this is again where I said that you'd have to adjust it. So if I were to put son here, or daughter or son, whatever it is, and then set this to self, first off, it's going to be a little weird, because if someone saw that and said, well, the head of household is 2 years old, whereas the son is, you know, 33, it's going to be a little bit weird. But it usually is going to be something kind of like along this lines. Veteran status, no. Race, we're going to set it as Asian or Asian American. If I had someone who identified as female as the head of household, or any sort of like person above the age of 18, that identified as female, it will ask for pregnancy status and due date if that pregnancy status is considered as yes. So again, be aware of that. That might pop up. I hit save and close because I have my family members. Next is going to be program enrollment. So when we were looking at the client profile, the shelter the homeless HRC, that's where this will come in. So right now we have basically everything in here on the training database that you can think of. I'm just going to choose, what do I want to go with? What do I want to go with? There's a lot. This one's kind of hard because there's a lot. I'm not used to this many options. Let's do ICCS emergency shelter. So next you're going to choose the project, and then it'll choose which location you're going to be, or which people you're going to be putting into this enrollment. So I get a lot of questions where it's like, well, I have 5 people on this family. I don't know how to just choose 3 or what have you. This is where that occurs. You can have 100 people on that person's family, the known family list. All it matters is right here when you're doing the program enrollment and being like, okay, this is the people who actually need to be in shelter. That family list, for example, that 100 people that I was talking about, that's just every single person that that person could be on this list for. You just get to select which people are actually going into that project. So I'm choosing, test and jest going into this. You're going to have a piece of information up here. So gender, age, project start date. Project start date is when they are actually setting up a case plan with that case manager. So I put it as, it'll automatically set it to whatever day you were filling this out. So if you're unfortunately falling behind getting your entry assessments in, make sure that you'll have to click this calendar and go back to when you actually set that, project start date with that client. To also give an idea, for example, if I'm doing ICCS emergency shelter, this is also like when they're actually, starting their stay in shelter. So kind of give you a rough idea of what that means. Next is case manager. It automatically designates to whoever is filling out the assessment, and then relationship to head of household, self and daughter. Now at the bottom, you're going to see a restriction. It automatically designates to restrict to MOU info release, and as I stated in that first part of the training, it's related directly to that informed consent release. If a client does not want to share their information in the system, you clicked restrict to org, and you have to make sure that is the same on all of these assessments. Is restrict to MOU is what it'll naturally go towards, but if they do not sign that informed consent release, you're going to have to fill this. You're going to have to select this button, and you're going to have to make sure it's the same for every single page. It's not the same anywhere else, just because all you're doing is telling the system or telling client track what the person's information is. It's not until you get to program enrollment where you really have to do that, and I have to go find ICCS again. There it is. It's not until then that you have to really worry about that. So this is where it starts. But for this case, we'll say that they did do the informed consent release, and we're going to go ahead and hit save. Now it's going to go through the assessments for each person. So this is where you get to make stuff up as you go. I'm going to make it really simple and say no to everything. Disabling conditions starts here. If you're familiar with the assessments, you have things like financial, domestic violence, universal data assessment, disabling conditions, things like that. Disabling condition is in, unfortunately, this is an odd space for it. This doesn't get asked later until after you get through the universal data assessment. You know you're in the universal data assessment, by the way, because of this up here. It says universal data assessment. But for this one, we're going to go ahead and say no. Enrollment COC, this will naturally, you'll have to make sure that it automatically populates to your COC. Since Iron County Care and Share falls into balance of state, that's where it'll naturally go to. Next is prior living situation. With prior living situation, keep in mind that this is where did they stay last night. This is not in reference to where did they stay 10 years ago. This is directly related to where they were just that last night. So in this case, since they're going to an emergency shelter, I'll say that they are a place not meant for habitation. Length of stay in prior living situation, so how long were they there? So if you're having problems remembering how long they were there, try and have that compassionate conversation with your client. These are people, and so don't be very interrogative with these questions. So it's just when you're saying, hey, what's your length of stay in a prior living situation? Instead of sounding very formal, just been like, okay, where did you stay last night? All right, perfect. How long were you there? And if they say, well, I don't remember, it's just be like, okay, do you remember, like, has it been longer than a week? Has it been longer than a month? Because you don't need to, it's good to get to specifics, but it's not good to just keep badgering over and over if it's like, well, no, I have to know exactly when you were staying in that prior living situation. Try to have that compassion, try and figure that out as easy as you can with the client. But in this case, we'll say, 2 to 6 nights, you set the date, we'll say the 22nd, regardless of where they stayed last night, number of times the client has been on the streets, in an emergency shelter, or safe haven in the past 3 years, including today. You're going to have people who say, I've been homeless this entire time. You're going to have people say, I've been homeless 100 times. I've been homeless twice. If they are starting to say, like, I've been homeless 100 times, try and backdate it a little bit. Just say, okay, so if you were homeless starting like last month, where were you before that? Okay, where were you before that? Try and like piece this together with the client. Try and get them to understand it's not me versus you. It's us working out the problem. In this case, we'll say one time. This was their first time. Next, total number of months homeless on the street, in an emergency shelter or street or safe haven in the past 3 years. This is just a total. Now, something to be aware of is if a client says, well, I started my experience of homelessness on August 29th, and it is now September 1st. That is classified as 2 months. So just be aware of that as you're going through this. In this case, we'll say 1 month. This is the first time. Eviction history, again, not required. If it is something that your agency would like to collect, make sure it's backed up in policy, and also make sure that you understand the definition of eviction. So in this case, it is eviction history questions ask about legal evictions that appear on a person's background check during their apartment application. If a person has an eviction, their previous landlord will have filed a complaint and summons with the court. A 3-day pay, vacate, or another similar notice is not an eviction in this context. So make sure you have that definition in the back of your head when you're asking that question. Prior zip code, again, with this one, this is going to be where did they stay in, where were they stayed in a housing situation for at least 90 days or more. So addresses of emergency shelters should not be recorded here. That does not count. This is, if they're staying in an apartment, staying with a friend, something like that. In this case, we'll say 84111. That's the one I got in the back of my head. Prior zip code quality, this will pop up. Again, if they don't know, client prefers not to answer, data not collected, that's where that'll go. But in this case, we'll say full zip code recorded. After that, covered by health insurance. We'll say no to this one, but it covers all of these different things. And now it moves on to the barriers. As I said, in a universal data assessment, that question's at the beginning. Now we're moving into, if I were to answer yes to this, and if I were to, keep moving forward. So if I said yes to this and no to everything else and I hit save and close, it's going to say, nope, something's wrong. It's going to pop up this little icon that says condition is indefinite, is a required field. So if you say yes to that, save and close. Now it says, okay, now something's wrong. You have identified a special need as indefinite. This conflicts with what you answered before. So I'd be like, oopsie. So you either have to go back to the universal data assessment for this client or change this to no. It's basically what the system is. The system is saying logically that is a little bit different. Next is going to be asking about domestic violence assessment. So if you say yes to this, it's going to ask when experience occurred and are you currently fleeing. Be understanding that if you're asking this question, read the room. If this can be a very charging question, and we want to be as compassionate and as understanding as possible, especially when we're asking something like this. A lot of these questions are already pretty probing. We do not want to put anyone in risk. So again, when you're asking this question, make sure you're reading the room when you're doing that. For this example, we'll go ahead and say no. Go ahead and hit save. Next is going to be income sources and non-cash benefits. So income sources, if you hit yes to this is going to ask about like earned income. So if they're working full-time, part-time, are they getting SSDI or SSI? Are they getting TANF, child support, any of that? That needs to be, that can be identified here. But in this case, we'll say no. Next is non-cash benefits of any source. If I say yes to this, is stuff like SNAP, TANF, WIC, that kind of stuff. Again, it's not required, and if you need to collect this, make sure you're policy is backing this up, but if you can hit expenses, this is kind of their budget. So how much are they paying for car payment, miscellaneous rent, car insurance, all that can be right in here as well. In this case, we're going to keep it as select just because I did not fill anything out. So hit save and close. This is going to be the translation assistance needed. So if you have someone who comes in who English is not their first language and they need translation assistance, this is where you can keep track of that. If you say yes to this, we have come up with, for the state of Utah, we've come up with 20 most common languages that we have seen service providers tell us that they encounter. This goes from everything from American Sign Language, English can be on here, Spanish, anything like that. Now, if it is something that is not on this list, you can click different preferred language and fill out what that language is. If you are seeing this language pop up more and more and more and more, please let us know, because we can alter this list to better attribute to the languages that Utah needs. But because this goes directly into a report, and if you're filling something out that is just like you're filling out over and over again, realizing, hey, I'm asking this quite a bit, we can update this so that way it captures that a little bit better. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and say no, though. Go and hit save. Now I have finished the intake and the entry enrollment and entry assessment for my first client test client P. Now I've moved on to the infant. So in this case, I'm not going to go through all this again, but I'll say no to both of these. And you're going to see it's significantly shorter. I'm going to hit no to the barriers. And if you click this little button down here, this automatically populates everything to no, so it's a lot quicker for you. Little tip. Hit save and close, and bam, it's already done. That's why in the homework, I highly suggest you do an adult and you do a child under the age of 18. It makes this so much faster. So, we've already gone over the dashboard, but I want to point you out, from our original example, it said 0 under active household members. Now this one, for this new client that we created, says 2. This means that there are 2 clients who are actively needing services from ICCS Emergency Shelter. That's where that lies. Now I didn't address these over here beforehand. The reason is because now I can address it. There are 2 ways to access any sort of information when it comes to Client Track. That is either on the sidebar or this action button right here next to the enrollment. The buttons over here are going to give you access to everything that client has encountered. So for example, if you are looking up assessments for a client, it will bring up every single assessment. But if you're looking up specifically assessments for your client in relation to this project, this one project, you click on this action button and you click on associated assessments, and it'll bring up this page. And this is only attributed to that enrollment. But if you're looking up every single assessment, it's going to be here. Now this is a bad example just because there's only one assessment. But if I were to go back to, let's say if I were to go back to why not? Let's go to this one. If I were to go to this client, this one has quite a few different enrollments. If I were to click on master assessment, bam, that's everything that this client has gone through. And it's a good way to show like what that client has gone through. So bear in mind, this is not a bad thing to use. It's just, something to be aware of. But let's go back to our original client that we were working with. Oh, I have it backward. There you go. So now I've gone back to this client, and I wanted to show you, there's 2 ways to do things. So first you have client information up here. This is all their information, paused workflows. So if I needed to come back, if I had to pause something, and I'll show you that during program enrollment. If I needed to pause something, this is where I can come back to that. Edit a client's information. This is where you can do that. Current family members. This is everyone that's in that client's family. Again, this is not going to be directly related to that enrollment. This is just everyone who's in that family. Also family history, same kind of way. This is, which groups of families they've been a part of. Phone number and address, photo, notification, information release exceptions. Information release exceptions, whenever we talked about in that first part of the training of like, hey, I want to work with this agency, but I don't want to work with that agency. This is where that can occur. Something I want to address with client photos, you can add client photos here. However, if you happen to see photos that are directly like pulled from jail or prison, those kind of photos, please let us know. We need to remove them. We don't like having mugshots in the system. If it's just a client photo, that's fine, but we don't want mugshots in the system. Okay, so that goes over client information. Next is services at the top, and I'm just going to run down this list at the top. Services is next. So as I said, if a client is staying at this shelter, what did they do when they were there? Well, let's add a service and find out. So you can do this in two ways, as I said. You can click on services here, or let's go back to the client dashboard, or you can click on the action buttons here and hit services. I like using one or the other just because it helps my brain work a little bit faster. I tend to stick to the action buttons just because I want to stick with what specifically that client is utilizing at that enrollment, especially when you run into those clients who've had unfortunately been accessing the system for a while. But let's go ahead and add a service. And a lot of this is going to look really confusing. I want to just stress that it's just for those things that have the red asterisks. So for this one, it's going to be the open enrollment that I currently have. If you have a client who has multiple enrollments, make sure that you're filling out only for that enrollment that you need. Next is the service. So what did they do? Well, let's see. Let's do clothing voucher. So clothing voucher on what day? Let's say today, 9/25, they needed clothes. You have units of measurement, so dollars, minutes, count, hours. For you case managers, minutes and hours in increments of 15 minutes will determine how long you've met with that client. In this one, since it's clothing voucher, we'll say it's one count. If you were actually like doing, say bus tokens and you were giving out, $3 and change, you could do dollars and change the unit value to 3. Most of you who are doing, these services that are not money related are going to be doing either count, so how many vouchers did you hand out, or minutes or hours, how long did you meet with that client. Well, we'll go ahead and do count. User performing the service, this will automatically populate to you. If you want to add comments, that's fine. And again, if you need to restrict to org, make sure that's down here as well. All this other stuff like grants, location, yes, you can add that, but again, I would stick to the stuff that's having the red asterisk. It just makes your life a lot easier. So we're going to go ahead and hit save, and you're going to see now the services popped up here, clothing voucher, and I can click here as well. It pops up again. Nothing really changed, but it gives you a good idea that where you can go. But it tells you when it was done, what the service was, how many units it was. If there was a dollar amount, you can add that here, and then the organization that this was under. If you are wanting to edit anything, you can go back and edit this. If you need to update and go, oh, it wasn't clothing voucher, crud, it was, donated clothing or whatever. You can click on that and it can update it as well. So that's services, and you also have quick services and import services. Again, you're probably gonna want to stick to more just this area, services as a whole. For you case managers, this is where your world is going to be for a while. You have case notes, current living situation, your coordinated entries, SPDAT, case managers. This is basic end user training, so I'm not going to go over case management just yet, but I do want to point out for those of you who are doing, case management, your case notes are going to sit here. You can add your case notes, your templates, all that jazz is right in here. And you can also attach it to a case management service and enrollment if you would like. Well, you have to if you do a case note. You can do documents check. You can list off who the case manager is, in this case, me. You can also look at client reports, anything like that is going to live in here. Also, for you case managers, you have to do case plans and action items. There is a separate training for that on our website, but just to briefly go through it, this is where you set your case plans and your action items. I don't want to go too heavily into this just because this is basic end user training. Next is enrollments and assessments. So everything we've talked about, if you wanted to look up enrollments for a client, you can click on enrollments and it'll bring up every single enrollment. Master assessments, same. Barriers, domestic violence, financial, all of this is for you to access. This gives you just a holistic picture of everything that client has gone through. If we were to do translation assistance, you can say, okay, no assistance needed. If you want to look up domestic violence, survivor of domestic violence, no. That is everything we have gone through when we did the entry assessment. Barriers, said no to everything. This is where this will only update as it's changed through the process. So if a client 3 months down the road goes to a different facility needing services and they say, I have a physical disability, I broke my leg or whatever it may be, this will update to yes rather than no. So it's to the most recent barrier assessment. A lot of this stuff you're going to see and you're going to be like, do I have to do that? I want to point out, if you would like to, when we go through the workflow, it's automatically designed to go through only what you need to pay attention to. For everything that you want to check on, you can click on review and it'll bring up 4 of 8. Everyone thinks, oh, well, I have to do these ones as well. No, you do not. That's why the workflows are designed the way that they are, so that way it's a lot faster. But we're going to go ahead and continue on. If you are an agency that does, SSVF, RI, HOPWA, that's where these things will lie. If you're doing VASH, SSVF, these are where your assessments are going to be. If you are, designated as veterans or RI, which is runaway homeless youth, HOPWA, housing opportunities for people living with AIDS, that's where we've established those workflows to automatically go through those required assessments. So you can check them here, but we pulled them out so that way, because this is already getting really busy, we wanted to only have here things that are absolutely necessary. So that's where those are lying. So next part of the homework, let's go back to the client dashboard. Next is going to be doing a during program enrollment. So this is the part where everyone usually misses in the homework, unfortunately. I'm just putting this out there right now. This is where the during program enrollment is. As part of the homework, you're required to do this. So again, big asterisk right here. You need to click on the action button and hit annual update during program enrollment, create or edit. So you click on that. The difference between this, and I'll skip through this pretty quick. The difference between these two is during program is like, say, how I said no to everything, health insurance, income, all that. If you have something happen where it's like, hey, my client has been set up with health insurance within like 3 weeks of being here, that's where you can go in and during program enrollment. Or if you're required to do it quarterly, that's where that will be done. New annual assessments are required to be done if a client is staying in a project for 365 days. So every 365 days, if they have not left that project, you need to do an annual assessment. Since I'm doing this the same day, I'm not going to be doing an annual assessment. I'm going to be doing it during program enrollment. And this is going to go pretty fast with this. I'm going to go ahead and do health insurance as my only change. So I'll hit yes, and I'll do Medicaid. There are some differences. So apply decision pending, apply client not eligible, client did not apply, insurance type, all of that is for if you select no. If you hit yes, it automatically goes away, but you don't have to fill out that information unless you want to. Next is barriers. We're going to go ahead and say no to everything as well, just to speed through this. Hit no for domestic violence experience, just because that's what we answered before. Income from any source, we're going to go ahead and say no to those as well. And then it just jumps straight to the child. Do the during program enrollment as well, otherwise it will not pop up on that family member. If you skip that, it goes away. And actually that reminds me, I want to show you. So if I were to hit pause here, it says the workflow was paused successfully. If I go back to client information and I hit client pause workflows, it's not going to bring up mine. It's not going to bring up that original client's. You're going to want to click on expand up here at the top, and it'll bring up the family members. And you're going to want to click on the child and pause workflow. Uh-oh, mine didn't show up. Maybe it's an assessment. Oh no, it's all the way back here. Okay, so for this one, if I was doing this workflow still, I'm just going to show you briefly how I just got there. So from the client's workspace, this is a different area. You're going to want to hit your home button. You're going to hit tools, paused operations, as I showed you before, and then it brings up this one. So you can either resume, restart, delete the workflow, and it'll tell you the information. So this one is program date update annual assessment. So I want to resume it. So you go back there, and we're going to go ahead and hit yes for health coverage, yes for Medicaid, hit yes, and then barriers we're going to keep no, and then we're done. So that is a during program enrollment. Next, we're going to be doing, we've already done services. So part of the homework, as I've stated, is you have to create a client, which is what we did here. You have to create an entry assessment and enrollment, which is this. I did it for a family. Then you have to do a services, which is what we did over here for the donated clothing. Then we did a during program enrollment. To find that information, you click on enrollments and assessments, and you click on master assessments, or you can click on this action item button and hit associated assessments. This just brings up for the specific client. says entry, and then during program enrollment. This is what we look at when we grade, is if this, it can be out of order just because if you're doing it on the same day, but we need to see during program enrollment update. Okay, then the final thing we need to do as part of the requirements for training is an exit. A client sometimes will exit without telling you where they are. It's always best to try and build that relationship up with the client so that way they will tell you where they exited to. So let's go ahead and go through that. So again, with exiting a client, it can be kind of finicky just because if they do leave without telling you where they go, there's nothing you really can do. So in those kind of situations, while it is technically ill-advised, you'd hit no exit interview completed. But just be aware, it's always best to try and get a positive exit destination rather than something negative. Now, for the homework purposes, you are not allowed to select any of these down here. So no exit interview completed, other, deceased, none of that. We don't want to see any of that. We want to see something up here. So for this one, since they're going from an emergency shelter, I'll say staying or living with family, permanent tenure. So that means they're going to go live with family for a very long time. After that, it'll ask you, do you want to fill out any services? Do not select this button. Do not select this button. This will select every single one of these, and it will automatically populate to your enrollment. That is a nightmare. There's 313 different services that will select. Please do not do that. It makes my life a little challenging. You can just hit save and skip past it. Next is going to be the universal data assessment. So we'll say that they lost their health insurance, so that way we can just go through this really quickly. Goes to barriers next. There are no barriers, so then we're going to go to income. We'll say no to income. And then do you want to exit? Now, real life is messy. We understand that. So in this case, if you have a client who says, I want this person off my bed list, or I want them to go away, that's fine. You can choose to exit them or not exit them. In this case, we'll say yes. Destination, same. So they're going to be living with family, staying or living with family, permanent tenure. And then again, do not select services. Hit save. Covered by health insurance, we'll say no. Barriers, there are no barriers, so we'll hit save and close, and then that's it. Now we're done. So for the homework purposes, that is completed. Everything's done now. After this, for the basic end user homework, we do ask that you fill out 2 single adult clients and 2 family members. I did an example here for family members, and in the training slides, once you actually are accessing the slides, we do have this tracking sheet available for you. So as you're going through this, there's a whole bunch of slides, everything pretty much in line with what I just talked about. You can look up here. But we have this tracking sheet here. So client 1, client 2, family member 1, family member 2, and then we need you to sign an end user agreement. So we've already talked about what that end user agreement is supposed to look like. So if you would like to use this to track, that's totally fine. Your password will most likely be this generic template password once we get you set up. If it is different, we will let you know, but this is where you can find that. We also have our website for the training database. You cannot access the training database until we send you the email saying that we have. So just be aware of that. But again, this is our training slide deck. This goes through everything that we literally just talked about. It gives you access to pretty much everything you need to for that. So that's it. And again, email us once you've completed your homework, so that way we can get through this. If you have any questions, email us or ask your supervisors, and we'll get you set up. But thank you so much for attending basic end user training.